Do you think the public understands the difference between discourse on policy and discourse that is personal and that is attacking and that is intended to jibe up the whole political arena and get folks to take one side or the other? Do you think the average person understands the difference? And do politicians understand the difference? Jasmine, you go if you want to.
Well, ideology is a tricky question. Ideology is very different from policy. If we take a big ideological question like, do we want the government more involved in our lives? That seems like a simple question, but it has two very different strains. Do we want the government more involved in our pocketbooks, or do we want the government more involved in our bedrooms? Both parties have flipped responses to those questions. So the stereotypical Democrat wants politicians in the pocketbook but out of the bedroom, and the stereotypical Republican wants the opposite, get in the bedroom, out of the pocketbook. I think it is hard for the average person to consume political information when the parties are ideologically separate but internally inconsistent. If we throw the mix of where we should be in the world, then we'll know that Republicans and Democrats also have changed over time about whether or not to engage other countries and how. So in short, yes, it is confusing for the average person to see two parties that are so mixed up sometimes internally. There are other countries around the world where interest groups are parties, like Israel or Italy, and you can have an AARP party, you can have an NRA party. That might make things a little clearer, but then it's hard to govern because there's no clear majority sometimes.
Okay. I will say one thing about the politicians. I think there are many, and I'm going to speak now, unless I say differently, I'm speaking now about congressional politics, congressmen and women, not city council people, not state legislators and so forth. In Congress, I would say that there are probably a majority of the members in Congress don't know the difference. And not just that they don't know the difference between politics and policy, they don't try to analyze whether there's a difference. Policy and politics become one, and that because there are an awful lot of people in Congress who are there as a job that they desperately want to keep. They really don't have a sense of purpose there, except to stay there. And then there are those in Congress, and we now have probably 50 or 60 new members who fall into this category, who are ideological, who are there because of ideology. They're purely because ideology and partisan politics have merged for them. And so I don't think they know the difference. Probably, again, less than half actually do understand the difference. And as far as the American people are concerned, I have no clue. I'm still trying to figure that out.
Do you want to weigh in, Trey?
Sure. I'm a glass, this water bottle is half full. That's the kind of person I am, and I'd like to think, and I usually believe that the public does, get it, and it's sometimes the representatives that don't get it. But I think one of the things that makes it tough right now, we live in an interesting time right now. The public can learn so much more about the individuals on a personal level, on their policies, than ever before, because there's so many more news sources that are out there. I mean, it's just, I remember when I was in college, I was kind of a geek, and I had the local paper mailed to my dorm room so I could keep up with what was going on back home. Well, now you just hop on the internet and you get an RSS feed, and it's in your inbox or it's in your reader, and so it's so much easier to gain information. The flip side of that is it's also easier to only get the information that reinforces what you believe or doesn't really stretch you or disagree with you. And so you have this factor that I think tugs at the public. So you have, on the one hand, a lot more informed. They have deeper knowledge, but they're not maybe used to getting sort of the other side of the story.
Jasmine raised an incredibly important point, and that was the historical perspective that we consider this topic in. I worked on Capitol Hill in the 70s, and I worked for a moderate Republican named Marlo Cook, senator from Kentucky. And at that time...
Who else did you work with? Mitch McConnell, right?
And Mitch, well, yeah. And Mitch and I were political...
Oh, the irony is thick.
Yeah. And back then, in the Republican Party, just in the Senate, you had everybody from Jacob Javits and Ed Brooke and Mark Hatfield from Oregon and and Bob Packwood, who would today be as liberal as it gets, to Barry Goldwater and Strom Thurmond and you name it. I mean, that was in one party. On the Democratic side, you had Kennedy, Ted Kennedy, you had Hubert Humphrey and Fritz Mondale, and a lot of classic liberals. And then you had John Stennis and Russell Long and a lot of Dixiecrats who are as conservative as in today's world as you could get. So you had the entire range of philosophical spectrum in both parties, which meant you always had people working together across lines depending on the issue. That doesn't exist today, and that's a huge difference in terms of helping the American people figure out who the sides are and what they need.